I'm going to wish everyone a good afternoon, as confusing as that is, because we're postponed to 12 p.m., which of course means 12:10 p.m. in Stephen class time. And thank you for indulging the adjustment in schedule. I had the privilege of speaking today at Horace Mann Middle
Hey,
um, for their first ever Jewish Affinity Assembly. They had a musical performance. The students put together some videos about what Judaism means to them. They blew the shofar. They played Hatikva on the piano,
Wow, very
and
nice.
then
wow.
they invited a guest speaker, and
And it was you.
that turned out to be me, much to my surprise. So I got
Are
a
there many Jews at Horace Mann?
Yes,
Or is it all, was it all
no,
Jewish?
it's many Jews.
Yes, there's a significant Jewish population. As I mentioned on my way coming back on foot, I wrote a message to our office staff, our synagogue team, to say that a number of the students came over to me and they said, where are you a rabbi? And I said, Hebrew Institute of Riverdale, right on the Parkway. And they said, oh, that's the place that we drive by and we see the sign outside that has the numbers of days for the hostages. And I said, yes, that's us. And it's meaningful to them, to know that that's being preserved and that that's out there in a place that people can see. And so I expressed gratitude to our building staff because they climb up on a ladder and
Wow.
chase them down in the wind, and they're really invested in maintaining that public acknowledgement. So we can only pray that the sign will be able to be taken down speedily and soon.
Yeah.
If you see smoke in the background in the windows behind me, please do not be alarmed while we're praying
See,
for the end of the fires in Israel. And it does seem like there's been progress to get them more under control. But we are barbecuing because it's Yom HaAtzmaut. It's Israel's 77th anniversary and birthday. And we had a beautiful gathering at Shul last night, what we call the Tekes Ma'avar, the transition ceremony, going from Yom HaZikaron, from Memorial Day for Israel's fallen soldiers and victims of terror, to Yom HaAtzmaut, and just making that impossible transition from sadness to joy. We always have both. And this morning I did a part of one of my Yom HaAtzmaut customs, which is to watch some of the Chidon Tanach, the international Bible contest finals, which are held in Israel. An SAR high school student, I think his first name is Eitan, but I might be misremembering his first name. Rosenstock was there and participated very well. And a student from Frisch came in second place to an Israeli who won. And I don't know the answers to even a quarter of the questions. It's just remarkable the
wow.
amount of Bible knowledge these young people attain. And as a friend from HIR would say, they've forgotten more Tanakh than I ever knew. And it's just really inspiring to see their love of learning, and that they choose to spend their time studying and learning, and they do a great job in this contest. You can find it on YouTube. It's fun to watch. And
Aren't there two
Can,
tracks, an Israeli and diaspora track?
so I don't, there's a lot of dimensions to how the competition works, and I don't know exactly how it works, but this seems to have, so it might be that to qualify, there are different standards for Israelis and diaspora Jews, but the finals seem to have a mixture from all around the world, to South America
Mhm.
and and the United States and Israel. There was a finalist from South Africa. So really, really cool to see. Mama Toby's grandson Judah and our son Ilan are in the national finals, which is about 300 students this Sunday, as well as my parents, another one of my parents' grandchildren, my niece Amalia. They come together actually to SAR from around the country to take a couple of written tests, and the very top few advance next year to Israel on Israel Independence Day. So it's really wonderful to see that love of the study of Tanakh still be a centerpiece of Israeli culture, and shared with diaspora Jewry as well. So it's very appropriate on Yom HaAtzmaut to be studying Tanach. And
can I just
yes,
add one
please.
thing? I was living in Israel. It was during the time of when Israel celebrated its first anniversary, and I always remember there was a parade. And when I looked up in the sky, Israel had 5 planes. It was just 5, and I remember they flew over all 5 of them at the same time as there was a parade. So it was, a few years ago, but it was the first anniversary.
Amazing.
It's kind of nice.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that memory. It enriches so much. We've come a long way, and we're also still incredibly young as a country. 77 years is a blink in the eye of history.
It was yesterday.
Yes. Some of us have lived through the whole thing. We have a long way to go. And please God, we keep going forward in the right direction. Certainly it's a time for pride and for hope and for prayers and for aspiration of where we've gotten to and where we want to get to. Not an easy time in Israel by any stretch of the imagination, internally and vis-a-vis our those who wish and do us harm. But we really try to mark this day in an optimistic way. That's certainly what I'm striving to do. So also those who are here are welcome to join us this afternoon, 4:45. We have a great barbecue. We have a DJ. We have some of our elected officials visiting. We've got activities for little kids. And it's a nice opportunity to celebrate Israeli style with a barbecue. So with all of that said, we're in Ezekiel chapter 4. If you have a brown Tanach, it's page 1160, 1160. This is really a chapter which picks up right where we left off in the previous, in chapter 3, and will also, continue uninterrupted into chapter 5 in the series of prophetic theater, symbolic prophecy, in which Ezekiel is being asked to do things that are of symbolic meaning. One of the questions we have to wrestle with as we read this chapter is, who saw it? And so therefore, for whose purpose was the things that Ezekiel is doing? Why is he doing them? And I hope at the end to maybe offer a thought about a particular link between this and our celebration of Yom HaAtzmaut today. So we're going to see some fascinating and difficult symbolic prophecies or prophetic theater as we read through chapter 4. So just jump back a few verses to the end of chapter 3. God told him in verse 24 to go shut himself up in his house, that some kind of cords, avotim, some kind of bonds have been placed upon him or bound him, such that he can't go out amongst the people. A typical place of a prophet is betoch ami, amongst the people, and but he's constrained in the same way that he not only is physically constrained, but he's vocally constrained in verse 26. His tongue cleaves to his palate, he can't speak. He's not able to be a mochiach, another one of the classic prophetic roles, someone who offers criticism of the people, and somehow God either feels that they're even beyond reproof, that nothing can change them, or for some other reason he wants to restrain Ezekiel. So he can't leave his home and he can't really speak. The only things he can say are the specific messages God gives him to deliver. And even those, who knows who will ultimately listen to them, we read in verse 27. Okay, and then we come into chapter 4. So in a sense, one symbolic prophetic act is the being bound up and confined to his home. And now he's instructed, therefore, to do something while he's in his home, a series of things that's going to last for an extended period of time. Arnie, it's so good to see you. It's so good to have you here. And maybe we can celebrate your return by asking you to read, if you feel up to it, chapter 4, first few verses.
And you, O mortal, take a brick and put it in front of you, and incise on it a city, Jerusalem. Set up a siege against it, and build towers against it, and cast a mound against it, pitch camps against it, and bring up battering rams round about it. Then take an iron plate and place it as an iron wall between yourself and the city, and set your face against it. Thus it shall be under siege. You shall besiege it. This shall be an omen for the house of Israel. Then lie on your left side, and let it bear the punishment of the house of Israel. For as many days as you lie on it, you shall you shall bear their punishment. For I impose upon you 390 days, corresponding to the number of the years of their punishment. And so you shall bear the punishment for the house of Israel. When you have completed these, you shall lie another 40 days on your right side and bear the punishment of the house of Judah. I impose on you 1 day for each year.
Hmm.
Then with bared arm, set your face toward besieged Jerusalem and prophesy against it. Now I put cords upon you, so that you cannot turn from side to side until you complete your days of siege.
Okay, perfect. Arnie, pause there. And Elaine, will you read the end for us from verse 9?
Further, take wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millet, and emmer. Put them into one vessel and bake them into bread. Eat it as many days as you lie on your side, 390. The food that you eat shall be by weight, 20 shekels a day. This you shall eat in the space of a day. And you shall drink water by measure. Drink a sixth of a hin in the space of a day. Eat it as a barley cake. You shall bake it on human excrement before their eyes.
Hmm.
So said God, shall the people of Israel eat their bread impure among the nations to which I will banish them.
Hmm.
Then I said, Ah, my sovereign God, my person was never defiled, nor have I eaten anything that died of itself or was torn by beasts from my youth until now, nor has foul flesh entered my mouth. The answer came, See, I allowed you cow's dung instead of human excrement. Prepare your bread on that. And I was told, O mortal, I am going to break the staff of bread in Jerusalem, and they shall eat bread by weight in anxiety and drink water by measure in horror, so that lacking bread and water, they shall stare at each other, heartsick over their iniquity.
Oof. Wow.
Yeah. Wow. Wow is right. So we have a series of symbolic acts that Ezekiel is meant to engage in that actually coordinate with one another. So first we know from the previous chapter that he's shut up in his house and he can't speak. Then God tells him to take this brick, levena, and inscribe upon it or engrave in it an image of the city of Jerusalem. So we have a physical representation of Jerusalem. Then, and here you start, the Lego lover in me starts to picture this little scene. He's supposed to build miniature, right, so that they're kind of to scale with this brick. He's supposed to build miniature siege siege objects, essentially. A mound, that's something that might have been used to kind of try to go up and go over the city walls or be able to get something, catapult something into the city walls from an elevation. A mound, battering rams, camps of soldiers. That's part two. So make a model Jerusalem, build a likeness, a representation, a miniature siege around Jerusalem, And then take this iron plate. The Hebrew is machavat barzel. Modern Hebrew machavat is a frying pan. So it may very well have been a cooking implement of some kind. And it's going to symbolically represent the wall between you and the city. So we've got, imagine, well, actually, let me take one more step so we can get the full picture. Then lie on your side. And we'll go into the details of the lying on the side. And we'll put aside the bread for a moment. But now we can picture the scene. For many days, for well over a year, Ezekiel is meant to lie down on his side. In front of him is an iron frying pan or some type of object that serves as a barrier. And on the other side of that seems to be the siege of Jerusalem and Jerusalem. So he is concealed, he's blocked from being able to see the siege of Jerusalem, and he's operating or experiencing things from a place of constraint outside of the sphere of action of the city of Jerusalem and the siege that's befalling it. And he's meant to be constrained beyond that scene of action, lying on his side for these 390 and then 40 more days. And then he's supposed to offer a prophecy, but we don't know what that prophecy is in verse 7. So that sort of remains mysterious in this chapter. That's sort of left unfinished. He's told that he's going to have these cords that are going to bind him from being able to even turn. And the siege is referred to as something which is being carried out in a sense by him in verse 8, the days of your siege. And it says it again in verse 3, V'tzarta aleha, you are laying siege. So there's an ambiguity of exactly, is he sieging or being besieged? What's Ezekiel's role in this symbolic prophetic play? And then the last piece, as he lies on his side, motionless for many, many days at a time, he has a very meager diet, which he has to have prepared for himself. This is what you can find on the shelves of grocery stores as Ezekiel 4:9 bread, because people have turned this into a recipe, which is the idea seems to be, in Jewish tradition, and in lots of human cultures, wheat is, good quality for producing flour. And all these other things, barley, beans, lentils, etc., they might be nice to eat on their own, but as the sources of flour, they won't produce a good quality bread. And so Ezekiel's being told to take some wheat, but then the rest of it has to be an admixture of this lower quality stuff. And they get put into a vessel and baked into bread. That's his diet. Not only is he eating poor quality food, but his ration is very, very small. In verse 10, we're told that he eats 20 shekels of weight of bread a day and drinks a sixth of a hin per day. And the biblical scholars who've tried to kind of replicate or understand this have calculated that the bread comes to about 1,000 calories a day, and the water comes to about 2 cups of water a day. So it's clearly a subsistence diet. It's not a healthy, sufficient quantity of food on a daily basis. It might have been survivable because he was motionless. So he was not expending calories in any significant way. But certainly he was eating a substandard diet when it comes to nutrition. And the only protestation that Ezekiel makes of the whole thing is in is in response in verse 14 to what God tells him in verses 12 and 13, when God says, you bake this barley cake on coals that are fueled by human excrement. And Ezekiel says, listen, God, there's a line here. And his claim has to do with the fact that he's a priest, he's a Kohen, and he is punctilious about the laws of purity and impurity. And his understanding is that if the bread is baked through the heat that's generated from human excrement, that conducts a certain kind of impurity. It's almost like it's less actually I think our visceral reaction is just human excrement is gross. But his comment is human hearts are contributing towards the baking of this product, it has almost the flavor, no pun intended, of consuming human product. Yes, it's not human flesh, but it's human product, which is part of the ingredients, so to speak, because it's the source of the fuel for this bread. And he says that God, would upend a practice that I've been particular about from my whole life. He says in verse 14 that this is something he has been careful about not doing minu'uri va'ad ata, from my youth until now. So we already know that he was not a youth, Ezekiel, at this stage of his life. And God acquiesces. God says, fine, I'll let you sub in cow dung instead of human excrement and make your bread on that. And then we get just the first kind of application of this prophecy, which is that this is what the experience of the people in Jerusalem when they are besieged will be like. Low quality food, minimal amounts of food, eaten with great anxiety and conscious of their wrongdoings, hungry, they will just sort of stare at each other. So this is the scene that God is telling Ezekiel he's going to undertake for well over a year, 390 days plus 40 days, lying with minimal food, rationed amounts, staring at an iron curtain, on the other side of which is a diorama of the siege of Jerusalem. And this is Ezekiel's lot. And he's doing this shut up in his home. And so circling back to what I said at the outset, we have no idea if anybody else in the world at that time knows this is happening and is bearing witness to it, or if this is literally a one-man show with no audience that's only for Ezekiel. And I think one of the questions is, what's the consequence of either interpretation of the idea of it being seen by people versus the idea of it being private? And what exactly is, we know a piece of the metaphor. What role does Ezekiel play in the metaphor? Who is he representing? He's not inside the siege. So who is he representing? And what else do we understand from this chapter? Those are some of my opening questions. And let's take some thoughts and reactions, and then I'll share a few more thoughts. Yeah, Mama Toby, go ahead.
It's because I'm coming to this chapter a little late, but what's on the other side of the Iron Curtain? What is it?
That meaning, what did we in the chapter? Yeah, diorama is the brick inscribed. What we saw at the beginning of the chapter. It's the brick inscribed with a engraving of Jerusalem and these little siege. So it seems to be, best understanding is, it's the siege of Jerusalem, which Ezekiel knows is going to happen soon. So I'm glad you asked. Let me just set the scene one more step, which is the reminder that Ezekiel is in exile. He's in Babylonia with the first round of exiles, the ones who were exiled in the year 597. It's not yet 586 when Nebuchadnezzar comes and completes the attack on Judah and Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, and the exile of nearly the entire rest of the population of Judea. So we're in that period in between. The first wave of exiles is gone. Ezekiel has gone with them, and he's meant to be setting up and watching, but not actually able to see the scene of the siege of Jerusalem, which is going to happen in a few years' time.
What is 390?
Okay, good. Well, yes,
That?
excellent question. We'll come to that too. Yes, the instruction is for him to engrave it. Yep, it says in verse 1, V'chakota aleha ir et Yerushalayim. He's supposed to engrave Jerusalem. He's supposed to set up these little, miniature siege figures, and then he's supposed to set himself up outside the scene with this iron, divider. Yes. He prepared the whole thing. Then he places this iron divider, and then he lies outside it. So he's looking towards it, but he can't see the thing that he made. Yep. Okay, Lance.
Question. Ezekiel seems to me to be, first of all, he's a priest, and he's a recursive miniature of what subsequent Jew?
You tell me. Which
Jesus.
subject of Jesus? Okay, say more.
Yep. Um, the situation here ostensibly is, I guess, telling the Jews or the Israelites what they're going to expect when they are under siege. Is that correct?
Yes, that's one piece of it.
Yeah. Um, but it seems to me that the correspondence between Ezekiel and Jesus is a little bit too much for me to take. I feel that this is actually, assuming that Ezekiel, you see Ezekiel as a priest, which you mentioned, this is being anti-Kahanic. This is being Jewish anti-Semitism because you're really making fun or attacking the priests. You're saying that they're basically, for all this time that Ezekiel's in his house, the house of the Lord, let's say, he is really being tortured, just like our hostages. Am I right?
Yes, yes, but
He is.
my hunch is that it's not oriented towards his priestliness. I view that as an non-trivial but still incidental to this reality. He's a prophet. He's a prophet who happens to be a priest, not the other
No,
way.
but I would suggest humbly that there is the priestly, it has to do with the pure and the impure.
Yes,
And that's what the excrement, one thing the excrement can be interpreted as.
yes, yes.
So that it does involve priestly, and there's a sense in which the priests were, of course, running the first temple, and everything was pretty good for a while, and suddenly the Babylonians came in and destroyed the first temple, and it wasn't 390 days until they got to Jerusalem.
Not as far as I know,
There
but
is a 390 in there somewhere.
oh, there
That
is.
time.
Okay, find
Yeah.
it and let us know.
Okay. The thing about Jesus is that in the epistles to the Hebrews, Jesus is considered a priest. And in the book of John, Jesus is considered a Samaritan. And the Samaritans, as we know, are a Kahanic religion. So from my point of view, this is just my nuttiness. I see Jesus as a character representing the high priest of the Samaritans. And it's possible that the book of Ezekiel that we're reading is really a projection by, let's say, Samaritan Christians, for example, or Christians, back onto an Israelite canvas.
Okay, great insight. Thank you. Let me come to Elaine's question because she asked about the 390. And Lance, if you do come across a 390, let me know because this seems to be the 390 and the 40, which we saw in verses 5 and 6, have flummoxed the commentaries across the history of interpretation of Ezekiel because I'm not aware of a 390 elsewhere in the Tanakh. It's the framing seems to be that the 390 days correspond to the 390 years of wrongdoing or punishment of the house of Israel. Now, in Ezekiel, the house of Israel generally refers to the whole people of Israel. But when we hear the house of Israel, we often think about the northern kingdom. So if we attempt to put the 390 years into some kind of calculation about the northern kingdom, we remember that the northern kingdom was exiled in the year 722. So 390, if that's the conclusion of a 390-year period, that takes us to 1112 before the Common Era, which is not a particularly remarkable date. It's before the monarchy of, Saul and David and the beginning of the, unified kingdom. It takes us back into the period of the judges. So if 390 is meant to correspond to a period of time of punishment or wrongdoing for the house of Israel, which is supposed to end at 722, it's not clear where that begins. If it's meant to refer not to the house of Israel, meaning only the northern kingdom, but to the entire people, in which case, maybe we want to date the end of it to 586, and then, take 390 from there. It also doesn't land at a specific obvious time, the time of the construction of the temple or anything like that. So it's not totally clear. One date presents itself, which is if you add 390, which is described as the punishment of the house of Israel, and then the additional 40, which is the punishment of the house of Judah. And this is tricky because when we get to the total, there's no particular way that the application of the division into two parts works. But if we get the total of 430, there is a particular moment where 430 appears in the Tanach, and it's here in the book of Exodus, chapter 12, when the Israelites go forth from Egypt. We're told, "Umoshav b'nei Yisrael asher yashvu b'Mitzrayim," the length of time that Israel dwelt in Egypt was shloshim shana v'arba meot shana, was 30 years and 400 years, 430.
Wow.
Now, that calculation in and of itself is not straightforward. It certainly doesn't seem, we may remember from the Haggadah that they're enslaved for only 210 years. So how far back does that 430 go? But okay, at least if we're looking for correspondences, we have this correspondence. But how does that make sense? The idea that, 430 days corresponds to the punishment of the house of Israel and the house of Judah. What would that have to do with the slavery in Egypt? Not totally clear, but that's at least one data point of 430. 40s, I see you, Lance, hold on. 40s, we have much more spread around the Bible. Some of the commentaries point out that one of the wicked kings, reigned for 40 years, a king of Judah, King Manasseh. So maybe there's a correspondence of 40 days for the 40 years of the kind of most wicked rule of the house of Judah. But the question is better than the answer here. There's no kind of consensus or easy direct reference between a 390 and a 40 or a 430 to a particular demonstrated historical moment. So again, speculations and ideas are welcome, but just to point out that it's yet another of the, not clear parts of this chapter. One, Rabbi Alex Israel, who has a podcast on, one chapter of Tanach a day on the 929 website, he speculates whether it's possible that 430 days was actually the length of the siege of Jerusalem, which does last for a little more than a year. But still, we're left with the question, okay, if Ezekiel is being besieged in his own home for 430 days, and that corresponds to the length of the siege of Jerusalem, which is going to happen a number of years hence in Israel. Ezekiel's in Babylonia, but still the correspondence to the 430 years is not totally clear. So this remains a challenging open question. Take a quick reaction from Lance on the numbers, and then if anyone else wants to weigh in.
Okay, I consulted AI Overview, which is generative AI, and AI Overview writes, the 390-year period in the context of Ezekiel's prophecy, as mentioned in Ezekiel 4:9, represents the period from the dedication of Solomon's temple to the siege and destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians in 587. This time frame is a symbolic representation of Israel's punishment for their idolatry and disobedience.
Okay. I don't think that that 390 is attested anywhere in the Bible as the duration of the time that the temple stood. It's probably not very far off, but I don't think it's attested as 390 or 430. So it's as good a speculation as any other. I just don't think we have it proven in the calculation of years in the Tanakh anywhere. Okay, other questions or comments? Just yes, Mama Toby, and then yep, absolutely.
Still trying to figure out what's happening.
Okay, good.
When it says that you shall bear the punishment for the house of Israel and then the house of Judah, it sounds like he's doing the punishment so that the siege won't happen, or so that Israel and Judah won't have to suffer this, because he's suffering it for them. sort of like Jesus.
Right. So this leads to a really interesting question. What does nosei avon, which is the term that we have in verse 4 at the end, you shall bear their punishment. We have it again in verse 5, v'nasata avon beit Yisrael, and again in verse 6, v'nasata avon. Does bearing punishment mean therefore relieving it of others, or does it simply mean you as an individual will carry also the experience of the punishment? Not that it's being displaced from the Israelites, the house of Judah, the house of Israel, onto you, but you will have a personal experience of, you will carry the thing which is also going to happen to them. I have to assume that only because we know the siege happened. So, unless somehow God, wanted to have Ezekiel take it off of their shoulders, but then didn't feel that it was successful and therefore imposed it anyway on the Israelites. But it does seem, when we talk about God as nosei avon, it's one of God's forgiving qualities. It's really interesting question. What does it mean that God bears our iniquity? Does it mean it's part of the forgiving process, but it doesn't necessarily mean erases our iniquity. It sort of means tolerates and doesn't utterly destroy in the face of it, like carries it, but doesn't necessarily carry it away. So it's a slippery term, and it's hard to say for sure, but it definitely, I think we have to, from context, interpret it essentially as saying you're going to have an individualized, concentrated experience of what the Israelites are going to go through. And again, I hope we'll leave a little time at the end to still circle back to the question of, is that a public display that everyone's supposed to see and learn something from? Or is it simply I don't want to call it a punishment necessarily, but is it simply an experience that a prophet needs to bear for their own sake without reference to anybody else? Yeah, Ellen.
I guess a lot of my comments were very similar to Toby's.
Yeah.
The fact that God himself is imposing a punishment on the prophet that he chose.
Hmm.
So you have to assume that there were qualities in Ezekiel that God chose, good qualities. I assume you don't want some derelict to be a prophet.
Yep.
And then he turns around and directly, I mean, the other punishments or the other hard lives of prophets were not directly imposed by God. And here he is directly imposing. And then I assumed the same thing, that if he's going to punish him for it, then it's like
least
the
he should say
sacrificial
something
lamb.
else.
Then the rest of them don't have to go through it. They're, while he's lying on his side, not eating, they're going about their lives. They don't see him. It's a very deep concept that God has chosen the one person he's going to punish to be the person who is also he chose to be his prophet.
Yes. And I want to compound, I see Graham's hand also, I want to compound just by pointing out that I could imagine a trajectory in which God says, part of my training you is to train you in empathy. And therefore you have to endure what the Israelites are going to go through so that you will be ready to say to them, guys, mend your ways. I know what the future is going to look like for you. I experienced it myself. And so please, repent. But there's two problems with that. One, which are interrelated. One is that God seems to be telling Ezekiel, most people are not going to listen to you. So what good is it? And I'm not going to let you say very much to anyone. So why is this being put upon Ezekiel? I think we have to be left with the question. And I think one of the difficult answers is this prophet, or is a part of the job of the prophet, who is always, and Arnie, whenever you're not here, we always reference this in your name, the kind of person who's shuttling back and forth between two poles, God and the people, in some way advocating for God to the people and advocating for the people to God. And is some dimension of that also need to be a sort of forced identification with the experience of the people, almost no matter what the outcome of that is, whether you can do anything with it or not. The prophet, to understand the people, has to be brought through some type of experience of what the people are going to experience. It's not a happy or good answer or explanation. And one of the things that it really made me think about, and in particular, I want to sort of fast forward for a moment to kind of the bigger picture of how I've been thinking about this chapter. So I think what a lot of people suggest is that Ezekiel is being instructed to set up the siege of Jerusalem that's going to happen, and then experience a distance from it, because that is actually his reality. He's in Babylonia. He will not witness the siege and downfall of Jerusalem, and neither will the people who live with him. They'll know it's happening, but they won't actually be present or able to do anything about it. They're spared in a sense, but they're also distanced. And I think that feature, the iron barrier, is as important to this chapter as anything else, because for me, it highlights the relationship between diaspora Jewry and Israeli Jewry. We have this divide. We have lots of technology at our disposal that enables us to see lots of things that are happening in real time in Israel and vice versa that our forebears didn't have. But in the end, I have always felt that there is a profound, uncrossable divide. As much as there are bonds of connection and shared experience and love and mutual support, I've always found that there's a kind of an uncrossable divide between the experience of Israeli Jews and the experience of diaspora Jews. And I think Ezekiel is actually modeling the experience of the diaspora Jew of today, of literally today. I know what's happening. I play some part in inscribing Jerusalem and its experiences in my life. I know what's happening on the other side, but I'm also distanced from it. And there's the pain of not being there. There's the reality of that distance. There's the experience of knowing I'm being spared something when something bad or hard is happening, but also the sense of hopelessness and powerlessness of being able to impact the reality across that divide. And so I think Ezekiel is being sort of trained in what it is to be a diaspora Jew who cares about the Jews of Israel, to be connected to what's happening, but also disconnected from what's happening, to see it and not see it at the same time, and to feel a sense of kind of closed off while it's happening. Again, there's lots of caveats to that and lots of alternatives to that. We have so many ways to connect, so many ways to impact, but I do think there's actually something very fundamental here that at least resonates for me as kind of a message of today. And I was thinking about it especially because a number of rabbis on some WhatsApp groups that I'm on were writing to an Israeli rabbi who a lot of us ask questions of Jewish law to, and writing, should we postpone our Yom HaAtzmaut celebrations? Because many of the Yom HaAtzmaut celebrations in Israel yesterday were canceled because of the fires. How could we celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut when they're not celebrating it in the regular way in Israel? Forget even, the shadow of October 7th, just the reality that events were canceled or postponed. What's the logic of us in the diaspora who are just doing this in solidarity to do it when they're not doing it? That experience of being on the other side of that iron divide. For me, though, the answer actually is, of course we should. We should, because while there is that division, there's also a connection. And when our brothers and sisters in Israel, due to circumstances beyond everyone's control, can't have their normal celebrations, our being able to celebrate is a testament to the fact that we are connected and that we can hear because we're not experiencing the same things that they are. And when we do celebrate and hold our events and our programs, it strengthens the connection of Jews across the world. So I know I veered a little bit towards the sermonic, but I actually think that so much of, separating from the details of the suffering experience, so much of the layout of this chapter is about what it's like to be a Jew in the diaspora, maintaining a connection, but also being aware of the distance from Jewish brothers and sisters in Israel. Now, I want to also just point out that Ezekiel is in a strange dual role here. He's being the diaspora Jew, connecting to his fellow diaspora Jews, and also trying to bridge the distance to Israel, but he's also, in a way, I think, symbolic of God here, because God says to him, you're the one who's sieging the land of Israel, and this is your siege. It both means that you are being besieged and also you're the sieger. And the other way, at least one other way, I think, of looking at this metaphoric setup is Ezekiel as the representative of God is also God, who's both carrying out what's happening, the agent behind what's happening in the siege of Jerusalem, but experientially for the people of Jerusalem feels unreachable, feels hidden. The language we always use when we talk about, times of catastrophe is that God is hidden. God is concealed. God is, on the other side of a wall that feels impenetrable. And so part of this is also the sense of where is God when this is happening? Present but unreachable, involved but also disconnected. If we read this as Ezekiel setting the events in motion and then retreating behind a wall, confined and constrained as it's going on, might be a way of talking about how we perceive God in moments of crisis. God is both the agent of it and also in some way feels distant when it's happening. So thank you for indulging a few thoughts. I know Graham has a hand, and then we'll come to others who want to. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a rhyme, but on this, it's this takes me back to the issue of Ezekiel being asked to do bizarre things by
Yes.
God, and I mean, like he was forced to lay down on his side, but it occurred to me as not so much as a torture, but as an ascetic way of testing to prove his willingness to do God's will under and in all circumstances, like almost like an induction into a cult, which Lance was saying, maybe there was a higher level of Kohanes that he was being tested to become a part of. And but when I read this, I actually tell you the truth, I was reminded of being a pledge in a fraternity. And there are these pledge tasks that are absurd and painful. Sleep deprivation comes to mind, just absurd stuff. And this was to show how determined the pledge, me in this case, and a bunch of other folks, was to be, how determined we were to be a brother in the fraternity. So they would ask us to do all kinds of things. Oh, it's really creepy. But very glad it's over with. But it was a lesson in. It reminded me of that. So you want to hear this rhyme, or just want to put it in
Of course, and then please do put it in the chat so that we can share it with others. Yep.
Okay, I see if it. Well, maybe the quality may be variable here. Wherever you go, there I am. My presence is hidden, my power alam. At first I will whisper, and then I will shout, for conquering fear is what I'm about. If no one can hear and it's down to one man, wherever you wander, there I will stand. If you listen to me, I will listen to you. Wherever you go, whatever you do, speak out in my name before it's too late. I trust your strong shoulders to carry the weight. Put all of your faith in the kingdom above. and trade in your fears for my power and my love. In shadows and light, through laughter and tears, I'll fill you with strength and conquer your fears.
Thank you, Graham. Always
Wow.
enhanced so much our learning from a different angle. So thank you. Paste it into the chat so we can put it in the next email. Arnie, go ahead, please.
I had two thoughts from this. One, not in a totally serious way, but God loved the Exodus generation. And this chapter sort of a play, a negative play on the Exodus, on Passover, even though the rabbis hadn't installed leaning to the left yet. Ezekiel leans to the left.
Yes.
He eats bread that's not really bread and that's not really prepared the right way.
Yes.
In counterpoint to matzah.
Yes.
So again, it's kind of like a critique of the generation. I would think that they're not up to Exodus standards. That's one thing. Then the other thing that really struck me, I mean, more seriously, is how God calls Ezekiel a mortal. He calls out his mortality. And, that's a big issue for me, how both in its wonder and in its difficulty, how God is so infinite and humans are so small, and how we relate to this huge, unknowable presence.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And
So
go ahead, Arnie.
I was just going to say, what can possibly Ezekiel be thinking when he's being told to do all these things that don't make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And in context, if we understand them, as having happened in chronological order, we're just on the heels of incredible encounters with God that he has had, right? The vision of the divine throne and chariot, the great rushing wind and spirit that has lifted him, stood him on his feet, picked him up. So there's a fascinating juxtaposition here, which is he's seen the incredible, sublime majesty of the divine more that the Talmud says, the Midrashic tradition talks about, the holds up Ezekiel as kind of the paradigm of the one who witnesses God in a singular way. Although to Arnie's point, if I remember right, the Talmud says about the splitting of the sea, and this is about the Exodus generation, even a handmaiden at the sea saw God more directly and intimately than Ezekiel did, right? So on the one hand, it strengthens the idea of that Exodus generation, but it also lifts up Ezekiel. He's the bar for having a real vision of God. So after having these sublime visions, these royal and majestic visions, then he's being told to do these strange and unusual things. It's in some context. It doesn't necessarily make them less inscrutable, but they're right on the heels of having kind of borne witness to the divine majesty. But yes, how he understands himself and his relationship with God is a fascinating question. And the notion of that term, which is not unique to Ezekiel, but far and away used much, much more for Ezekiel, the term mortal, Ben Adam, we mentioned in the last week or two, often is translated in two opposite ways. The mortal way is sort of saying, like, compared to me, you have to know your place. Yes, you're beholding God, but you're still a lowly mortal. But Ben Adam also can sort of mean singular man, like the ultimate man, and in many ways a parallel to Adam, to the first human. You are, Rav Soloveitchik spoke about Adam 1 and Adam 2. That's really Adam of Genesis 1 and Adam of Genesis 2. We might adopt his language to call Ezekiel Adam 2, in the sense that Adam was a unique creation who experienced God and was in this sort of special place. And Ezekiel 2, in another iteration of Jewish history, has this unique singular experience of beholding and connecting with God. Some of the commentaries also point out that Adam, the first human, experienced exile from an Edenic state, and Ezekiel also was exiled from the temple to exile. So there are Adam and Yechezkel connections that might make the Ben Adam mean singular lofty human. So even the nature of Ezekiel's identity and the tensions between his lofty state and his mortal state, are borne out in that term that's used for him. So yes, yeah, the word mortal that keeps being referred to in the English of the JPS, it's their choice of the translation for Ben Adam, which could be human, which rings differently than mortal, I think, in certain ways. Okay, we're at 108.
Stephen,
Yes, Arnie?
Stephen, would it make sense for God to be calling him an exalted term as he's giving him all these hardships?
It's a great question. I don't know if the implication of the question is how could that be? And I hear that, but it might also be you are my lofty singular partner, just like the people of Israel are my dearly beloved singular nation. And maybe we can use it to heighten the anguish we might imagine God could be feeling, to take it in another direction. We don't have to read it this way, but maybe one moves relative to the other. So if we think of Ben Adam in a lofty way, then poor God having to deliver this message to God's exalted partner, it probably hurt very, very much. But of course, God's choosing to do it. So what does that mean? But I absolutely hear the challenge. There feels like a stark contrast between the lofty definition and or reading and the thing Ezekiel's being asked to do. But I'm still not ready to relinquish that possible interpretation. Yeah, Lance, and then if anyone in the room wants to say anything before we wrap up.
Okay, my co-pilot indicates, Rob Stephen, that you're right. There are no other references to the 390 days in Tanakh. However, there are references to this verse in hold on a second, one second, the Midrash Tanhuma and Seder Olam. And there it's considered symbolical and not historical. Just one other little quick point, and that is when you say God is here and man is there, you're really using Cartesian dualism. For me, monotheism is the intertwining of man and God.
Beautiful.
Oops,
I like that.
I don't know.
Any last comments from anyone? A wild
I
chapter.
have to think about that, Lance.
That's good. Good. Oh, if we leave with things to think about, then we did well, and Ezekiel did well, and we'll be on to chapter 5, I believe, next week. I always take a moment to just check my calendar and that I'm not missing anything. Looking good. Hope to see you next
That's
Thursday,
right.
if not before.
I got another rhyme.
Yes. Okay. Go for it.
It was at the beginning. Discussion at the beginning. Here it is. It's quick. A time for pride and accomplishments, constrained by admonishments, with healthy self-criticism guiding the way. Without guilt will be built a brighter new day.
All right.
Oh my God.
A good wish for this moment, that a brighter new day be built. This morning in shul, we named twin girls. One of them was named Shoshana Adina, a gentle lily, and the other was named Shachar Zahava, a golden dawn. And so may we have sweet, beautiful nature. May the fields of Israel be protected and relieved from fire. And may we see a golden dawning of a better day for the state of Israel, for all of us. And in the merit of these two sweet little girls who were just received their names today. And love to mom and dad. And Chagat Smaut Sameach, everybody. See you later.
Thanks.
Bye.